us for our Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month panel. I'm Bernadette Young. I'm going to be the Asian community lead and for DuPage Dems. We're going to meet our local community leaders tonight, people who serve in our community, and we're going to get to know them a little bit. And we're going to start with Azam, please. If you would like to introduce yourself, and if you could also tell us about your cultural background and something you'd like to share.
Sure. Thank you so much, Bernadette, and thank you to the DuPage Dems, and particularly the leadership of our chair, Ken Beal. It's wonderful to join my colleagues on this important panel during this important month about Asian American culture and history. My name is Azam Nizamuddin, but people often call me Azam, so all my friends do, so you can too. I am a former chair of the Bloomingdale Township Democratic Organization. Professionally, I'm an attorney. I practice here in Hinsdale and all over DuPage and Cook County. And my heritage, basically, in terms of culture, stems from India. In fact, I was born in India, and my wife is also from there. And we're actually from a place called a city called Hyderabad, which is actually interesting because the largest population of people from Hyderabad, India, outside of India, is in Chicago, believe it or not. So it's a huge population of lots of people from that area. And I look forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. And Lucy, would you like to go next?
Sure. I am Lucy Chang Evans, and I am a newly elected, I feel like it's newly elected, but it's been about 6 months now, a county board member in District 3, which is from Naperville all the way to Hinsdale. Professionally, I'm a former Secret Service agent, and I'm a civil engineer. And my background is I am a Chinese American. My parents both came from Taiwan, so we have the Chinese heritage, and both my parents came from Taiwan to study in the US. So I speak both Mandarin and Hokkien. I think it's just called Hokkien, but 2 different dialects. And that's it.
Thank you. Saba?
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this forum. I think these conversations are really important, especially nowadays. So I'm glad that we are coming together to have these conversations. As Bernadette said, my name is Saba Haider. I was born and raised in India, and I moved to the US when I was 22 years of age. I come from suburbs of Delhi, New Delhi, which is the capital of India. It's a hot tropical place. I landed in Minneapolis some 17 years ago with a foot of snow. And mind you, I've never seen snow in my life ever. And I have icicles in my hair because my hair is wet, and it's just a disaster. But from that moment on, I made the US my home. I made this country my home. I have 2 wonderful kids. I'm raising them with my husband. I have a high schooler and I have a soon-to-be middle schooler. We have been here in the DuPage area for over 15 years, raising our family, and just absolutely love the community, and hope to be able to maintain the cultural heritage that is given to us as being born and raised in India, but at the same time now being US citizens, having our roots here. We feel incredibly lucky to have that background and this forward sort of mindset as we raise our family here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeena?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for this opportunity to share with you guys, answer some questions. I'm really glad for everybody who's here to be with us. I'm Yeena Yoo. I also was recently elected to the DuPage County Board for District 2. And I live in Elmhurst, and my district covers Elmhurst all the way to Lisle. I'm an attorney by trade. I have my master's in social work and my JD, and for a long, long time, I represented domestic violence survivors in family law litigation for their divorces and child custody and order of protection cases. And as for my heritage, I am South Korean, and my parents hail from Mokpo, South Korea, which is this oceanside town. It's now considered like the third biggest city of South Korea, which I didn't know. I had to look that up actually. But yeah, it's on the southwestern tip of South Korea. But I immigrated to the US, to St. Louis, Missouri at the age of 2. So I consider myself Korean American because I often feel like I straddle both worlds.
Thank you. So we're going to start, we're going to go in the same order again. Azam, if you would like to tell us, did you have any difficulties when you were growing up as far as being proud of your cultural identity?
That's an interesting question. So I grew up in Chicago, and from like kindergarten to 4th grade, and there's a lot of diversity there. So I had no issues. I remember people bringing in different cultural foods during certain holidays and so forth. But then in 4th grade, in the middle of 4th grade, we moved to the suburbs. And from the suburbs really all the way till high school, I was like the only person of color during that period of time. No African Americans, no Hispanics, no other Asians of any kind. I was the only one. And it was a bit of a transition for me. I think initially during 4th and 5th grade, I kind of got bullied a little bit, and back then bullying was normal. It was just a fact of life, just like the seasons are in Chicago. And you just kind of get used to it, being called different names and so forth and being different. And one thing I do still remember quite vividly is the fact that when I was getting sort of, pushed around, bullied, and isolated by classmates, both boys and girls, by the way, I remember reaching out for support from the teachers back then. And this is like 1977 to 1978. I know I'm aging myself, but and I remember getting basically no support where the teachers were like, well, that's just the way it is. You just have to deal with it. And I just remember that when I was talking to somebody about that, and it was challenging. So that itself was challenging. On the other hand, when you have different, we come from different multiple identities, right? So I'm an American, Indian, and Muslim at the same time. So we sort of have these different identities, and sometimes double identities that we have to live with, both in terms of our name, our cultures, and different practices that we may have, different customs. We didn't celebrate, for example, Christmas. We didn't celebrate Easter. And people would always ask, why aren't you celebrating these things and so forth. So notwithstanding all those things, we were able to, at my home, maintain our cultural identity very strongly. I spoke Urdu at home. Urdu is one of the biggest languages in the world, but also from India. So we spoke Urdu at home. We maintained our religious practices and our cultural practices. For example, when we went to weddings and parties, we would wear traditional Indian clothes and things like that. So it was very interesting growing up. It's a mix of, positivity and maintaining and being proud of our culture, but also with many challenges as well.
Thank you. Lucy? Oh,
Sorry, I unmuted. Yeah, I sure did have some struggles with having my cultural identity. There was one Korean family and one Chinese family in my entire elementary school. And so that made 6 people total, 3 people from my family, 3 people from the other family. And it was tough because we did get called names. I used to get called names a lot, especially walking home from school. Most of my friends didn't treat me any differently. But every once in a while, they would say something like, you don't really speak Chinese, do you? Or you don't really use chopsticks, do you? And I did, but I would actually even deny it. I'm like, no, I don't do any of that stuff. And I felt like I had to reject my culture. But and I went to Chinese school every Saturday. I hated that because back then we didn't have TiVo and Saturday morning cartoons were on during the time we were going to Chinese school. So I resented that. And I didn't want to learn Chinese. I just wanted to hang out at home and play with my friends. But yeah, as far as my background, it was tough. In Oregon, there was very few Asian people. And later in the late 70s, we had a lot of Vietnamese and Laotian refugees come. And then there were a lot of Asians in Portland, and it was interesting for me to see them struggle because they were learning a new language. They had these horrific stories from how they escaped and came to America. And I started to feel more pride about just being Asian back then and thinking, oh, okay, so, you know, there's more of us and they have interesting stories and we all have interesting stories. But I will say that being one of only a few Asians as a child, that made me probably more aggressive than I had to be. I felt like I had to prove myself in school. And, you know, I might have been, I don't know if anybody would call me a bully, like, but I definitely had bullying behavior. So I don't think I would have been that aggressive if I wasn't so afraid of being bullied myself. But yeah, I came to terms with it more when I was in college. So by the time I moved to California, everybody was, there were a lot of more Asians. I wasn't the only one in the room anymore.
Right. Thank you. Saba?
That's such a good question, and especially in my case, because when I moved to the US, I had already gone through my educational journey. I was 22 years of age, as I said earlier. So now, when I am 22, these are, especially for a young woman, these are such formative years because you're trying to find your identity. You're trying to find your place in the world and just really trying to figure out who you are as a person. And then when you're plucked 10,000 miles away from where you were born and raised and brought into this new world, then it's a crisis, it's a journey, it's exploration of its own kind that's very unique. I would have people come up to me often, especially, for example, we would go to this farmer's market and this person would say, oh, how come your English is so good? So I would never know how to respond to that comment / compliment. I didn't know what to do with it, like how to respond to something like, how come your English is so good? This assumption that because I look a certain way, I must not be able to speak proper English. Or sometimes people have gotten in my face and like, lady, in this country, you know, blah, 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 blah. We do things like, sometimes it has been that intense and aggressive. And as I'm trying to explain myself, they're like, oh, no, you don't know anything. In this country, we do things like that, you know, so experiences like that as a grown adult start to affect your sense of identity. And the important struggle is, how do you stay true to yourself and your sense of self, your sense of identity, while you're trying to still continue to grow as a human being, as a young person, at the same time trying to assimilate in this new culture, new environment, because my goal was to make sure that I am absorbing like a sponge everything that is around me, whether it is sitcoms, whether it is movies, newspapers, libraries. I was just going to read everything and learn everything and watch everything and visit everything, every museum 100 times, every library, you know, every weekend with my kids. I was going to do everything because I wanted to make sure that I understand the system well enough to be able to get assimilated and be a productive member of the community as well.
Thanks. Yeena?
Yes, like so many of the other panelists, I had a really hard time with my cultural identity. You know, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, so I was one of 2 Asian children in my classes in elementary school. And then later, by the time I'm a senior in high school, I was one of 8, but there were close to 400 students in my graduating senior class. So, you know, Azam mentioned that he was bullied, Lucy mentioned it too, and yes, that was par for the course for me as well as a child for a very long time. I actually have a really early memory. I think maybe I must have been 4, and I was being teased by children because of the way I said the word orange. I said it wrong. And, you know, I had the lunchroom scene, you know, that typical scene in, you know, school where you open up your lunch and everybody starts screaming and they're, you know, they're doing this, and that kind of thing happened to me as well. And wow, I disliked a lot of my physical features. I hated my eyes. So, you know, all of this is because I was confronted with dominant culture, right? And the dominant culture is obviously white, mainstream in Missouri. So I really tried hard to erase my Koreanness as much as I could. And it's kind of sad to think about it now, you know, to the point that I sometimes forgot what I looked like. If I looked in the mirror, I wasn't expecting an Asian person to look back at me. That's how, real it was. And I don't think I started accepting, my heritage until college, when I started finding a large community of Asian people, Asian students. I joined Asian Students Unit, I joined Korean Students Union, all of those things. So that made a big difference in my life.
Thank you. I think we can all agree we've experienced a lot of these microaggressions that other people may not realize. Even as adults, we experience these microaggressions. And thank you for sharing your experiences. So we're going to go back to Azam. What are the ways that you pass down your heritage and celebrate your culture with the younger generation?
Well, with respect to the younger generation, this includes my children, but also, my nieces and nephews and other people that I meet, I always emphasize the importance of, their own cultural background, because, as Yeena mentioned, there tends to be a dominant culture. So the whole idea, right, of a melting pot, or the idea of melding into America from different cultures, the idea is that you kind of come in and assimilate, and you assimilate into the dominant culture. That's the expectation of people of minority backgrounds. And I felt that, why is that the case? In other words, why is that? Because I think my parents, I think it's because we're from Hyderabad, India, and Hyderabadis tend to think their culture very positively, because it was a very successful princely state and empire almost for several centuries. And that it sort of created a sense of self-worth, the importance of culture, literary arts, etc., and the Urdu language. And I think because of that, I always had the sense of this is important historically, culturally, and existentially. So I think we always had a little bit of that in our family and our culture. So I always promoted that. But generally, for anybody, I would say that. And part of that included the importance of family, a family unity, the strength of the family, and history. So I always promote, the importance of knowing your backgrounds, whether it's genealogy or understanding important historical moments. For example, when we think about 1857, right? Well, what's 1857? 1857, for me, as a lawyer, is the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court ruled that a person who's a slave background can't be a citizen. From an Indian perspective, 1857 is the Great Rebellion against British colonization and empire by the Indians, particularly Muslims and Hindus. So knowing that history is important sort of to balance, remember the 70s when you looked at a map in your classroom, the center was the United States, right? They've changed that now to include the entire sort of global scene in one map. So I think those kinds of things are important. Additionally, just, maintaining our foods. Like, I always thought that our foods were very tasty. My mom was a great cook. So we have a very important dish from Hyderabad called biryani. And some of you have probably gone to Indian restaurants and tasted biryani. Well, I hate to say this, but the best biryani in town is a Hyderabadi biryani. And, I'm happy to put that up against anybody else. I know Saba may disagree, but that's okay. But, food, clothing. So like I mentioned, when we went to weddings and so forth, we dressed in our, traditional clothes and not like, jeans or shirts and things like that. The other thing I was really always proud of was maintaining my name. A lot of people sort of change their names. And Azam Nizamuddin is not a very easy name. It's not a very easy ballot name either. But the name Azam literally means most magnificent. And the last name Nizamuddin means organizer of religion. So it's the most magnificent organizer of religion. So when Muslims name their kids, they name it with some kind of positivity in effect. So those kinds of things I think are important for people to know from their own cultures, and not to simply change because you feel pressure or there's a dominant culture trying to impose that upon you. And that's how we've been doing it. And finally, visiting India, right? You visit your homeland or your parents' homeland or whatever, just to maintain that connection. So we've done that as well to sort of make that connection from our culture to our children.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, so my biggest mommy fail is that I did not teach my children how to speak Chinese. I tried, but it didn't take. And they fought me so hard that I was like, okay, to just keep my sanity, forget it, you know. But I really think that there is so much that you can learn from the culture through the language that I wished it would have worked out better for me, but these kids wasn't going to work. But they are half Asian, so their dad is white, a lot of European, and so they get that from that side of the family. And then so I feel like I'm more of the cultural side of my children, and they get a lot of my physical features. So it was tough for me to figure out how to pass down the Asian traditions. And so most of it is through food. You know, there's a lot of Chinese New Year. They don't even understand the importance of it, but they do like getting the money and they like good food. So it's at least that something. And, you know, I will cook Chinese food sometimes, but a lot of it is just the way I do things and the way I say things. My attitude is 100% my parents, you know, I'm frugal. I love a good deal. I scrutinize the quality of anything that they buy. That is from my parents, and it's a very cultural thing because all of their relatives are like that too. So a few years ago, I took all 3 of my children to Taiwan, and it was the first time. This was the second time that my daughter had gone. But she was so young, she didn't remember much of it. But this was the first time all 3 of them got to see Taiwan and got to see my side of the family, and just got to see, but we couldn't even fit everybody in a restaurant. You know, there were so many people, and they were very proud of it. And I was a little surprised at how proud they were of seeing the culture, knowing that they're from there, and being part of the different traditions that we did out there. And I think as adults, they're probably going to want to even seek out more. I'm hoping to take them to Taiwan again sometime in the next year, but it's been a process. And I wouldn't say that they're getting everything that I wish they had, but it's enough, and they know where they're from.
Thank you. Saba.
So I would agree with Azam, Lucy, and I'm sure I would with, and Yeena shares her thoughts that we do all of that. We try and make foods that are from our culture, try and speak to them in languages that are from our culture and our background. And I think it's so beautiful, the fact that they have us as their parents that come from a different background, different culture, but at the same time, they are growing up in the US. And really, truly, all of us, no matter what our background is or isn't, all of us are raising global citizens. We are raising global generation. Internet has connected us in ways that was not possible before. So even though the child may be growing up in the US, that child may be deeply connected to someone, say, in China or India or Europe or Middle East, wherever. So these kids are global citizens. And the fact that I try to take them to India with my husband every year to see that culture, to be part of that background. And the fact that they can see these disparities, the disparities that are often described as the first world, second world, third world countries, they can see all of that. They can learn from it. They can be better global citizens by understanding some of those disparities. But above all, what's more important to me is to see my children, and as I raise them in the US, is I see them as trees. And when you see trees, you see the trunk and you see the branches and you see the leaves and fruit, but their culture, their background that they are inheriting from us is their root system. And the root system has to be strong. Root system has to be thriving and ready to absorb everything, the nutrients that are around them. So I feel that our culture, our background is that root system, and allowing that root system to be strong and healthy so they feel pride in where their culture is, but at the same time realize that this country that gives them the most amount of freedom and liberty. I mean, it truly is one of the greatest nations, if not the greatest nation in the world, and it gives them so much freedom, opportunities, and liberties that are just second to none. That sky is now the US, that allows them to grow as a tree. Sky is the limit, and they have all the opportunities, freedoms, and liberties to be who they want to be in this country. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing, to feel that they have the freedom to grow into whatever they want to grow into.
I agree. Thank you. Yeena?
Yes, so like Lucy, like Saba was mentioning, food and traveling to the motherland, all of those things, we've done that. One of the, I guess, very overt ways that we try to pass on our culture is Lunar New Year. So I grew up celebrating Lunar New Year in January. And this is one way Korean immigrants could keep certain traditions alive in the United States. So using the calendar year, January 1, my family dressed in our hanboks, in our Korean traditional dress, to pay respects to our elders by bowing very deeply to them, hands on the floor kind of thing. And children received not only money, but they would also get words of advice or wisdom from their parents or grandparents. And I've done this for my entire life. And my children have grown up doing the same. And I think it's so important because it shows them that you're supposed to listen to your elders. And this is how you ring in the new year, by listening to your elders. And some of the other things that we do, just like culturally, when you hand something to somebody, you use two hands. When you drink alcohol, when they're older, you actually turn to the side and you drink so that you don't face your elders again. Isn't that interesting? So much of it has to do with honoring the people, the generation above you. So that's something that was really important to me.
Right. Thank you for sharing. As Azam mentioned earlier about, people changing their names, I don't think people realize, since the time of Ellis Island, and when people become naturalized citizens, they give you that option to change your name. And I always thought that was so odd that you would let people change their names to whatever they want to, and why people wouldn't keep their names when they became naturalized citizens. I obviously kept my name, but I always wondered about people who, why they would change their names. And they said they wanted people to be able to pronounce it. But to me, that also, you lose part of your identity that way. That's how I view it. So Azam, we're going to go to the next question. Are there any books or media that resonate with you as an Asian American?
There are some, let me start with the negative. In terms of movies or media, not really. It was interesting whenever we would watch, pictures or stories of youth or males growing up, whatever. There was no character that I could really identify with, because no one really experienced what I had experienced, which was a cultural sort of double consciousness, double identity. You always had somebody who was predominantly from a European perspective. And then later on, of course, you began to see some perspective of the African American experience, which is very important. And that came late, as it is, from Hollywood and the entertainment industry. But I would say the first real sort of connection, maybe slightly, was the movie Gandhi, which at least talked about India for the first time in a sort of global stage, and it won the Oscar. And then later on, the second one, more recent, was Slumdog Millionaire. Again, India, but not necessarily about me in any way. So from a personal character development, I have not seen anything. And maybe it's time for me to write a book about it, perhaps. In terms of the books, I would say the one that I really resonated with, I would mention three. One that I actually felt tremendous connection with, but also some sympathy with the book was called Snow Falling on Cedars, which was about a Japanese couple who grew up in the Seattle area in Washington during the Japanese internment, and the generation after that, and what they faced, the discrimination they faced. It was the discrimination part that I really resonated with. And then there was a book recently by Homa Abedin, who was the chief of staff for Hillary Clinton, whose family actually hails from India. And she too kind of experienced the same sort of cultural dissonance between someone who, was from Indian background, Hyderabad, North Delhi, but then grew up in Saudi Arabia and then wound up going to the United States for college and then working for, one of the most powerful political figures in American history. And that her memoir is called Both and A Life in Many Worlds. I really got into that because it really demonstrates some of the things that I went through. It's a beautiful book. And then finally, a book that has more history in it, which is about Hyderabad, is called White Moguls, about Hyderabad in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century. It's a love story, but it has all aspects of, British Empire, discrimination, and et cetera. It's just fantastic. So those two books I would say I was able to sort of resonate with, and certainly not Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. No.
Thank you. Lucy?
Thank you, Bernadette. I would say that the first book that really resonated with me was a book called The Joy Luck Club, written by Amy Tan. And it's a book about 4 women who came from China to the US, and then they raised families here. Each of them had a relationship. I think each of them had a daughter. And it was just kind of their stories interwoven. And I really liked that movie. That was number one. It was a book, and then they turned it into the movie. The movie deviated from the book, but so I liked the book better. But it was just a really beautiful story, and we don't have enough of those, and then let alone a story that has roots in China, and then the mother-daughter, and then comes to America and having a mother-daughter relationship. So I just thought that was a beautiful book. It was it made me proud, and it made me think a little bit about like how I don't know. I mean, I don't know how my mom made the decision to come to America, but just the thought of, oh, well, there was a thinking process behind it for a lot of people. And I wonder what she wanted for me, because I'm pretty sure she didn't think I was ever going to be a Secret Service agent or a politician or anything. But it's fun. It was a really good book, and it was just, being Asian was a big part of it, and but it was more than that. It was just a really good story. So I thought that was great. And I don't know, I think I'm going to leave it at that book, because I hope everybody reads it if they haven't read it yet.
It was a great book. Thank you. Saba?
So I feel like we have come a long way in terms of representation on media, especially. I mean, you go to Netflix, I think every second thing has some Indian something. If not, it definitely has an Indian wedding in the backdrop somehow, somewhere. So that's definitely changing, and I'm excited to see that. Never Have I Ever. I mean, it talks about the journey of this young mother. I think that's pretty spot on. No show can be really, truly perfect, but I think that did a good job. But I want to draw your attention to this book that my daughter got from her elementary school. It's called Bilal Cooks Dal. Now, if you know, dal is this lentil soup that is, it's a labor of love. You have to cook it for a long time, lots of ingredients. So this is a story about the 6-year-old whose name is Bilal, and Bilal is going to cook dal for his friends. And it's a story of community. It's a story of coming together over food. It's a story of patience, because now Bilal has to wait with his friends till this dal gets cooked, this lentil soup gets cooked. And then he gets to share this with his friends, but he's apprehensive whether his friends are going to like this, exotic, different food that they are not used to eating. So my daughter and I read this book, and she was just so happy that this book talks about dal that she eats pretty much every day at home. So she's like, "Oh, look, this is Bilal Cooks Dal. And can you teach me how to cook dal?" And just the fact that she saw that in her library, in her school, she felt very accepted and welcomed. And I think these are little steps that make our children, our future generation, feel more accepted and welcome. So I know it's a kindergarten book, it's an elementary book, but I would still highly encourage you all to read.
Thank you. Yeena, I'm going to let you answer that question, but also if you want to answer the last question, since you've been going last this whole time, I'll let you go first, about how your identity as an Asian American influenced your drive into local politics. So I'll let you do 2 questions in a row.
Okay, thank you. You know, I'm used to being last because of my name, but great. I get to go first for the last question. So, you know, what's really funny is that the book that resonated with me is also Joy Luck Club. And that just tells you that there were so few books that represented Asian culture, East Asian culture. And yeah, so Amy Tan was the first Asian author that I read, and she came from a Chinese background, obviously, but so much of what she wrote about and the cultural dissonance that she talked about, you know, the traditional old school mothers versus, you know, the American born children. I felt like that really echoed some of my life. And then, you know, on Netflix, I really liked Always Be My Maybe. Have you seen that movie? It actually came out 3 years ago. I think it was either during the pandemic or shortly after. And it has a Korean character. And one of the scenes that really kind of, I don't know, it shocked me a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And it was just this little scene of the daughter comes home from school and she takes off her shoes and she goes into the house and, you know, does, you know, her things. You know, she's a latchkey kid, she makes her own meals. And then there was another scene of, you know, kimchi jjigae, kimchi stew that the mom was making. So those 2 scenes made me like stop and like realize I have never seen this on TV before in the United States. So that was great. That was amazing. And then with regard to the last question, how does my identity as an Asian American influence my drive to be part of local politics? So I would say it was a huge motivation because, you know, I had started attending school board meetings and city council meetings, and there was this one part, at one point, they were doing strategic planning for the city. And I asked, you know, who was it that was being chosen for the strategic planning committee? And it was people who were on the city council who got to pick members in the community to be part of that committee. And they were going to be planning, you know, the future of the city. And I am 99% sure that everybody on the city council who are Caucasian asked people in their spheres, right, who were also Caucasian. Very few people of color were included in that strategic planning committee. And it occurred to me then that if we don't have representation at local levels even, then it's an echo chamber. People are only hearing and learning about what they already know and what they already understand. And there's never going to be a different perspective. And because I've experienced exclusion, I recognize that it was time that we had more inclusiveness in our local governments. And that is really the main reason why I decided to run for city council, which I lost, and then ultimately to run for county board. And I also understood that not a lot of people, Asian people in particular, want to run. I think that whole myth of model minority, there is some truth to that in the sense that we are focused on our education, on our successes, on our families, on our communities, but we don't want to stick our necks out all the time. And there aren't that many people who are willing to do that in local politics or just politics in general. And so it really came down to, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when, right? And I think it was John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who said that at one point. And that also made me decide to run.
Thank you so much. I think we lost Saba. So Lucy, if you want to answer the last question.
Sure. I wonder where Saba went. I wouldn't say that being Asian had any influence over whether or not I wanted to run for office, but I certainly think that I completely agree with Yeena where she says that very few people want to run for politics, and even fewer Asians would. And I apologize for that. I've been trying to move out of the light, but the sun's going down, so it's got this weird cast on me. But there are even fewer Asians that want to run for office. And you think about how much it sucks to lose an election. Yeena lost an election. I lost an election. And to get back up there, it was amazing how many Asians reached out to me after I lost that first election and said, you need to run for something else. You need to, and I didn't realize how important it was to them, to other people, to be represented. And so I thought, okay, I guess I'll get back up on the horse and do it, because there really is, it's very strange. I don't know, Yeena, if you have this feeling, but the weight of the Asian people is on my shoulders to some extent. They're like, we need you to run. And we need you to be our voice. And so, okay, I'll be the voice. And it's in everything I do. It's baked into everything I do, but it's not my entire identity. But I'm glad I'm here. And I think we all need to be in the room where it happens. I love that in the musical Hamilton, where they talk about the room where it happens. It's true. We all need a seat at the table, and we need to be in that room.
Exactly. Thank you. Azam?
I think that for me, I'm a firm believer in democratic institutions. And I think more than ever, we see the decline of democracies across the world. And particularly during the period of 2016 to 2020, we saw institutions being weakened. So I believe it's important to strengthen democratic institutions. And to that effect, there were really two justifications or motivations for me when I ran for judge in 2020. One was I strongly believe in justice and having justice. And I think part of me, probably because I was bullied when I was growing up and I was the only person of color for such a long time in school, I always believe I support the underdog often. Because I think the underdog needs representation, and the dominant forces, whether they're political, cultural, social, want to keep the underdog down. So I think justice is a very important motivation factor for me. And that's, of course, representation. When I ran for judge, what I realized was 14% of DuPage County is people of color, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians. There was not a single member of the 40+ judiciary that represented our community. No Asian, no Southeast Asians, no South Asians, no African Americans, no Hispanics, no Africans, no Middle Easterners. And the people who ran the judiciary were perfectly fine with that. If for the next 100 years there was no people of color, notwithstanding the world changing around them, they would be fine with that. So I said, you know what, it's time for people like me to stand up and run. And that's what really motivated me to run. And I still believe that it's important for the judiciary, even though now it's changing. We have the first African American appointed as a circuit for the first time in the history of DuPage County, but there are no Asians on the bench, whether they're South Asians like me or others. And think about the number of South Asians and Asian members of our county, how many there are, and what tremendous contributions they make in business, healthcare, teaching, education, etc. And yet there's no representation on the bench. So that's a big driving force to me. Of course, as a lawyer, I feel, given my 20+ years of experience, I'm competent and qualified to be a judge. So that's a factor from that perspective. But in other areas, whether you're county board, state rep, I believe that people really deserve to have good representation, people who can relate to them, talk to them, kind of know their language and culture and represent their interests in the Capitol. And that's something for too long that has been denied in this part of the state.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I see Saba's back. So if you would like to answer our final question, how does your identity as an Asian American influence your drive to be part of local politics?
Thank you, Bernadette, for giving me the opportunity. When you're having an important forum, only then will your Wi-Fi drop. So sorry about that, and I'm glad I'm able to come back. I was panicking a little bit. I think that's a really important question. And I'm reminded of my identity as this first generation Indian American. I am often asked questions that are accusatory almost in nature. Often my lived experiences as an immigrant are questioned, my history, my background is questioned, and it is portrayed almost mysterious as often but that is such a GOP tactic. That's such a fear-mongering tactic of what I don't know and understand. I'm going to claim that as dangerous or something that is not accepted, not to be welcomed. I'm constantly facing that challenge, but I refuse to allow somebody else define what a true American is, or define my experiences, or my Americanness, or my allegiance to the country, to the desire to be able to serve my communities, to be able to serve in these political positions in the future, hopefully. And I will continue to show up. I'll continue to do the work. I'm extremely honest. I'm extremely hardworking, and will continue to pave the way for the next generation so that other young first generation Indian American girls and women out there do not feel like they have to go through this purity test to be able to participate actively in the political scene, especially local offices. So I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to take the beating, take these difficult questions that are often guided by fear, often are just fear-mongering. It's very GOP in nature, but that's okay. And I will keep on going and keep doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's going to end our panel tonight. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us. I'd like to thank all our public servants who came and we got to know them a little better, and some personal things that we didn't know when they ran their campaigns. So that was really nice to hear. So we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette.
Thank you all very much
Thank you.
for sharing your stories. Thank you.